Well, hello, people. Welcome back to Warships once again with CS. This video is going to be another first, if you will. It features the Amagi or the IJN Amagi, which is actually probably my favorite battleship in the entire game so far, as well as the ship featured in some of my channel's arts. I guess perhaps I find the ships to be kind of pretty, if you will. I suppose if you are the type of person who's more emotional than rational, who loves to indulge and satisfy their senses, then perhaps this is actually the replay for you. It's a bit of a exhilarating train wreck. That's not exactly chill and reasonable, but ultimately it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's see what we have here. So obviously, my Amagi is a tier 8 Japanese battleship. Historically, this was a very large and powerful battle cruiser design. Conceptually, it's a follow-up to the Congo class. Meanwhile, chronologically, it comes after the Kongos, Fusos, Issei, Nagatos, and it was a contemporary to the Tosa class battleship, and arguably one of the last battle cruiser design the Japanese ever conceived, before essentially combining the concept of battleship and battle cruiser together to design and build, quote, fast battleships. Mobility-wise, this ship's excellent. It can do over 30 knots in a straight line. It turns moderately well. In terms of camo, it's not great because the ship's very long, probably over 250 millimeter, should I say, meters long in real life. A very tall pagoda-style mast. It displayed certainly more than 45,000 tons. Probably in full combat load close to 50,000 tons. The armor is decent but not great. The main side citadel armor belt is I believe 10 inches or 250 millimeters, which means if you don't angle, you're vulnerable to heavy caliber hits. And if you're unlucky, sometimes cruiser armor piercing can go through your citadel also, unfortunately. The deck armor is decent. And also, the placement of the turrets allow the Amagi to angle well. It allows you to kind of shoot over the shoulder and to angle heavily while still be able to engage the enemy with multiple lines of your guns.
Problem solved, sir.
The AA is already so-so, mostly because the Japanese relies too heavily on the 25mm autocannons. That kind of has a mediocre DPM as well as range, which is ultimately very accurate historically.
Torpedoes, direct front.
Anyway, so that's the basics. Perhaps in a future video, you have the time to go into greater detail about Amagi.
Enemy warship. All stations reporting the position of a strategic target.
As you know, I'm quite a nerd and that I could go through the details. I can probably teach a class about this for a whole semester and I wouldn't be running out of materials at all. Anyways, I digress. So the battle's been ongoing and it's been chaotic and kind of mindless in the sense that usually both sides are being quite aggressive. Perhaps this is because we are playing in epicenter mode, which means, ships on both sides of the teams have to essentially try to occupy the center zone on the map and engage in a brawl. The passive side will lose control of the battlefield and lose the game. But this type of situation kind of favors my playstyle because I tend to be quite broly and tend to be quite aggressive with the way I utilize my battleships, if you will. As you can see, when you're playing in Amagi,
Enemy cruiser foundered.
it's very important to know when to turn because you're big and long and a big target have poor camo, and your citadel armor when not angled is kind of vulnerable. But then if you do angle, your ability to shoot back is not really impeded. As you can see, I used the island as a cover to make a sharp hairpin turn, and I was angled once again, let off a whole salvo, and essentially wipes the enemy cruiser off the map. I believe that was a Miyoko. Ultimately, that's the bane of the Japanese cruisers. Too many turrets, too many quote armored torpedo launchers, which made their citadel huge. And ironically, the citadel armor of 4 or 5 inches does absolutely nothing against battleship rounds. Ironically, if anything, the only thing they would do is to make sure that the fuses on these heavy caliber shells meet sufficient resistance to be armed, and allowing your projectile to detonate within the hull of the ship, and essentially fuck them up.
Enemy heavily
As you can
damaged.
see, even though the projectiles on these 410mm or 16.1 inch Japanese guns at 45 caliber are lighter and inferior in terms of penetrating power and alpha in comparison to the super heavy 2,700 pound projectiles you shoot out of the 16 inches the Americans have, they nonetheless have absolutely no problem dealing damage to almost all of the enemy at all. They might run into some problems dealing with maybe the Yamatos or some of the tier 10s, maybe some of the tier 9s, but against tier 8s and below,
Main turret critically damaged.
if you shoot well, these shells can do wonders. Once again, as you can see, I angle forward, let off salvos when the enemy is distracted, another hairpin turn. You want to zigzag and essentially modulate your engagement distance with the enemies. You don't want to be too far and end up not having favorable RNG and accuracy and handling to do damage to the enemies.
Main turret critically
Meanwhile,
damaged.
you also don't want to be too close to the enemy and essentially render yourself vulnerable to destroyer attack, flanking attacks, ambushes, or being spammed to death when the RNG is fearing the enemies. Another thing to note when you are playing Battleship is to know
The ship is on
which
fire.
enemy target to shoot. Obviously, you know, as I said before, you do want to shoot a closer enemy because you have better handling and better dispersion and better RNG.
Problem solved,
But then
sir.
another thing to consider is you also want to make sure that the enemy you shoot is presenting a favorable angle to you. For example, if the enemy has their bow to you or have their stern to you, or if they're maneuvering violently, even though if they're close to you,
Enemy cruiser
there's a good
sunk.
chance that you're gonna end up with misses and bounces and autopans, or should I say overpans. So sometimes, you know, if you have an enemy that's further away from you, but they're flat to you, perhaps shooting them is a better bet.
Stations requesting fire on the designated target.
Another thing to notice right now is the fact that this game occurred just when the German battleships come online. And as you might have known, that you know, when a new tech tree has just shot up to the game, and suddenly you have people who are playing a high tier ship, or as in tanks, off that tree. They essentially whether free XP or use their wallet to get there. So they didn't really grind the ships, they didn't really take time out to know how to use the ships or get acquainted with the characteristics of the line.
Enemy battleship sunk.
So even though the hardware they have in control of are excellent, they're often vulnerable and clueless. As you can see, the enemies have become kind of reckless. The tunnel vision on some of my allies, meanwhile, made themselves quite vulnerable to me. And I would say that in a mid-range or long-range situation, the Amagi might as well be stronger than the Tirpitz and Bismarck, because you have a heavier broadside, you have 2 more guns, and your guns have a larger caliber, which means they have higher alpha and higher penetration, arguably, even though the German 50-inchers probably have about the same amount of penetration nonetheless, and they do have higher DPM. But when you're in a long-range sniping fight, alpha might end up mattering more than DPM, simply because the enemy can choose to engage and disengage at will more effectively, and they're also, due to the longer shell time, they're able to have more chance to maneuver away and to essentially equalize the whole ROF advantage, if you will. See, this is something else, people should learn to do about battleship, is the fact that when you are firing from fairly far away, your shots can often arc over islands. But you have to be cautious, because some islands are quite tall because of the mountains, and your shots wouldn't go through. But sometimes, it's kind of hard to lead the shots in this situation. But if you learn, if you get acquainted to how to do this, you can maximize your DPM further. It's simply because, otherwise you would have been holding on fire. And sometimes, that give you the enemy a chance to reposition or to whittle down your team. I would say that, out of the 2 battleships at Tier A I have played, the Amagi has
We've destroyed an enemy cruiser.
significantly better handling and ballistics and
Our team is taking the
RNG
lead.
than the North Carolina. But then ultimately, you're firing a lighter shell, a lower arc or angle, and at a higher muzzle velocity. And despite the higher muzzle velocity, you're shooting at a flatter arc. So that means quicker shell travel and shorter air time and less lead, which combined with the lighter shells and slightly worse pen than probably the North Carolina makes the Amagi a better cruiser killer, even though he actually has no problem doing citadels and fighting enemy battleships at all. At this point, we still have a semi-close game. It's our 3 versus the enemy 2. I believe the enemy battleship's panicking a little bit. He's also Amagi. He's obviously trying to angle against both myself and my ally, but as I mentioned before, this is why flanking attacks and pincer movements and being able to take down the enemy from their flank is very important, because ultimately it's very hard for the enemy to protect himself against attacks from 2 different sides. Armor angling becomes much harder.
Our team has taken the lead.
And unfortunately for the enemy, he figured out that having his stern towards my ally will render his citadel relatively safe from him, but he's completely flat to me now. So there he goes.
We've destroyed an enemy battleship.
Well, what do I have to say? 300k worth of profit. Without premium, 160k worth of damage. 71 hits, 5 kills, 4 awards. A Kraken. A devastating strike. I essentially deleted the tier 7 cruiser with one salvo. I mean, ultimately, people get excited over the Yamato. They like the Iowa. They're drawn to the Bismarck. But in my eyes, you know, the Amagi is absolutely amazing. Ironically, you know, it was a ship that was never completed because the Washington Naval Treaty. One of these babies was converted into an aircraft carrier. That kind of got taken out during Midway because the American codebreakers and Nimitz' competent leadership, while Nagumo was a bit of an idiot who disappointed Yamamoto. Go read about it. You know, if anything, the Amagi, if it was built, would have been one of those absolutely amazing post-World War I monsters, as with the Lexington class battle cruisers, the Hood, as well as maybe the British N3 and G3 super battleship and super battle cruisers. But you know, back in those days, people care more for their economy and the survival of their nations instead of naval porn, if you will. But to be honest, I totally recommend this ship. But I'll hold my word until I get a hold of the Bismarck and compare and see if that thing's as legendary as it's meant to be. But thanks for watching. Feel free to subscribe and leave comments and give me likes. I love some feedbacks, you know? I want to do more. Once again, thanks for watching.